Ryan Matthews is another guy. I mean, he's a big name, obviously, but look what happened in San Diego. Matthews goes down, he's out for a few weeks. Woodhead goes down, he's out for the year.
Yeah.
Donald Brown and the backup named Oliver are now running the show. And Donald Brown is not a guy you want to lean on as a running back. Anyone out there who has a spot on their bench should be trying to trade for Ryan Matthews, because as soon as Matthews comes back, with Woodhead out of the picture, there's going to be even more reliance on Matthews to be the guy he was last year. I mean, you remember Matthews ran for over 1,200 yards last year. He is, an 80 to 90 yard rusher, a game kind of player, and he also catches a few balls a game. So he is a high level player who I think some people are a little bit nervous about now because of his injury history and injury risk. But Woodhead's injury clears the path for a guy like that. And the last person I'll mention, I mentioned this a couple weeks ago on some other shows. I may have mentioned it on yours. I'm sorry, J-Rock, if I didn't. It may have just been because, there's so many guys to talk about. But Denard Robinson,
Absolutely.
I mentioned about 2 weeks ago. I wrote about it on my blog. I said, this is a guy who everyone should be focused on. Toby Gerhart is not the answer in Jacksonville. One of my bold predictions heading into the season, I make 10 of them each year, was that Gerhart would not be a top 30 fantasy running back. And a lot of people thought I was crazy. It's looking like it's going to work out that way now.
Yeah.
And the latest word 2 days ago, or yesterday, Jacksonville's head coach, Gus Bradley, said that Robinson's going to continue to get more reps at running back. He matched Gerhart rep for rep in week 3. And Robinson is now on the verge of taking control of the starting running back position in Jacksonville. It's not necessarily something you want, given Jacksonville's offensive line troubles, but with Bortles coming in, Blake Bortles, the rookie quarterback coming in, they have a bunch of great young receivers, and Allen Robinson, who I think is also a breakout candidate. He's a guy who I was targeting in August when Marquise Lee was a big name, Allen Hurns was a big name, Robinson was hurt in the preseason. But my research showed that Robinson was the most talented of the three. He was just hurt and he couldn't exhibit it in the preseason. I have Robinson in both of my leagues. So between Robinson Allen and Robinson Denard, Robinson brothers, if you get both of those, you're going to be getting them at dirt cheap prices, and you could find that you have number 3 receiver and number 2 running back potential as the season goes on.
I'll tell you what, I want to jump in while you're talking about that. Here's something that perhaps locally a little bit more of interest, but for those of you guys talking about looking for guys making the most of opportunity, the word that I've gotten this week from Cleveland, from the Browns here, is that there's a possibility that Isaiah Crowell ends up second on the depth chart to Ben Tate when they come out of the bye week. Word is, over the couple of practices this week, Crowell has gotten the majority of the number 2 reps and more. He's kind of moved up on the depth chart, unsurprised at all. And we saw during preseason, as much as I like T. West a lot, we saw that there's still some development stuff with him, even though he does run downhill. But there's a difference between the way he attacks the run and the way Crowell does. And I think the coaching staff sees that, because I saw yesterday he definitely took most of those reps ahead of West. So for those of you that do use West or that are looking at either of those running backs, be aware that it looks like Crowell, and then plus the Ben Tate factor in a week and a half, you don't know where he's going to fall when he comes back in either.
It's a great point. It's a great call on that. I read something similar to that this morning about Crowell and the fact that Terrence West, West is only, last week he scored, the week before he scored. And on its face, and this is the trouble that people have, if they look purely at statistics, and TDs can be the most misrepresentative statistic that there is in fantasy football. If people look at TDs and say, well, this guy had 12 TDs last year, well, he had 28 rushes. He's the guy at the goal line. Well, what happens if they don't have those goal line opportunities this year? Anyone who's reliant on TDs to make their fantasy mark, you don't want to rely on. And Crowell is a better runner. Like you said, he's able to find the seams better than West. West is not a guy who runs between the blockers as well. And Tate is Tate. Tate's going to continue to play a role in that offense when he's healthy. The whole knock on him is, will he stay healthy? So I agree that this is a great time to sell high on West for people who aren't paying attention to Tate's return. And it's a great time to buy low as you can on a guy like Crowell.
Absolutely. Of course, in our league, somebody snatched him up. But I mean, here in Cleveland, people are more, I'm sure you see that in other towns.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're more familiar with the hometown guys, so they'll grab a guy here and
Sure.
there. But that's something to watch. And the Browns insist, by the way, for those of you that have Ben Tate and for those of you that invested a decent draft pick in him, the Browns say we did not sign him to not have him start when he comes back, whether it's at Tennessee or when they come back home to Pittsburgh. It's going to be one of those, and I think he'll be after the bye week because they said 4 weeks, and that would be right around that time frame. They said 2 to 4 weeks, and that would be 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So I look for him to come back, but the Browns do say that at least until the on-the-field stuff makes it cause differently, that he's going to jump back into that first spot. But still, I don't know. I got to see more because, Tate got banged up early. But, man, got to see more of him because I don't know if he can hold off Crowell especially, let alone West, because both of those guys were doing a great job. But Crowell has just got that extra spark, man. I think he's going to be one of those next year. He's going to be one of those running backs that are much differently drafted than they were this year.
Yeah, I agree with you. And anytime – and your listeners know, anytime you have a situation where you've got 3 running backs with the potential to have a role, it's always a dangerous proposition. It's tough enough when you've got 2 running backs. You take the Dolphins week 1. Do you start Noshawn Marino? Do you pick Lamar Miller? It's much harder when you've got a 3-headed monster where at any time they might decide to go with the hot hand. And the hot hand might mean that Tate gets 5 carries in the first quarter, rushes for 14 yards, and the coaching staff sees something, and they take Tate out, they bring in Crowell. Crowell gets, 28 yards on 4 carries, and before you know, Crowell's taken over. And meanwhile, West might get his 5 or 7 touches. So there's always that danger when you've got three-headed monster instead of 2. It increases the probability that your guy that you're starting is going to get locked out before halftime. It doesn't mean it will happen. It just means it increases the chances.
Absolutely. You're listening to Sports Fix. BJ Rudell, author of Fantasy Football for Winners, with us here, and we're looking at some of the things. Let's look at some of the guys here, the matchups this weekend, some of the good ones and bad ones. Start at quarterback. I'm curious. I'll just start with my own question, and then you can kind of roll from there. I've got two very competent quarterbacks. I've got Andrew Luck taking on Tennessee. I've got Kirk Cousins taking on the Giants, who have been the Giants early on this season. Little torn which way I should go. Andrew Luck has not let me down so far this season, but looking at Cousins, licking his chops against that Giants defense, which way would you lean there in that?
I would do 2 things. I would start Luck, and I would trade Cousins. And I'm happy to wait if you want to put in a trade offer with one of your league members right now. But
you don't think I can trade Cousins any higher than he is right now,
huh? Cousins did in Washington last week what no Washington quarterback had done in like 25 years in terms of his 400-plus yards, 3 TDs. People start to believe, and I know you don't, but what people, when you see them on Twitter and on Facebook, people start to get caught up in, well, if they did this once, they can keep doing it. And logically, everyone knows that's not the case. But when you've got a guy on your team, it's easy to start to buy into it. Well, this guy is something special. And my warning to people who right now have Cousins, and you're in a great shape because you've got Luck, you really don't need anyone else. I mean, as long as you get through the bye week, Luck to me should be an every week starter. Once you start getting too cute with it, you end up starting the wrong guy at the wrong time. It's like having Matt Stafford and Drew Brees on the same team.
I do that a lot. I pick the wrong guys on the wrong weeks.
Yeah.
When I have my seasons that go foul, that's how it happens, is that I've got all the right guys, and I start them on the wrong weeks because I start getting too cute with it.
Yeah, that's if you can unload Cousins and get, let's say, a top 20 receiver, I think right now you could get a Keenan Allen for Cousins, or you could package Cousins and another guy for Eddie Lacy and who cares who else, and go for broke and see if Eddie Lacy is able to rebound. I think he will. Or a Matt Forte. So, running back who's underperforming, but isn't necessarily because, they have some ailment that's going to prevent them from playing. I mean, Lacy has a concussion issue, but that's behind him. He's now just not playing as effectively as he should be. But I feel like you have the opportunity to get a major upgrade in another position And that does two things. One, it totally takes pressure off you and your team to try to find that number 2 running back. If you get a high-level running back for Cousins, then you don't have to worry about scrounging around for that number 2 who may not, a Bernard Pierce or a Crowell when you've got, let's say, I don't know, who's your top running back, J-Rock, right now?
See, my running backs is what I need to shore up. So that's actually where I need to go because I've got Alfred Blue and Carlos Hyde. I'm kind of rotating them in the second spot, and I've got Zach Stacy as my number 1 guy.
Well, there you go. So you no longer have to rotate. Then, you've got, let's say you trade Cousins and some good receiver, decent receiver from Matt Forte. You now have Forte, one of the top running backs, and Stacy, a top 15 running back. Well, I think it's here to stay. I don't buy into the Benning Cunningham stuff. I think Stacy is a great all-around threat in an offense that's actually doing a little better than people probably expected when Bradford went out for the year. And then you don't have to worry. You've still got Andrew Luck. You're locked in at quarterback. You now have one of the top running backs and a very good number 2 running back. And you probably don't miss a beat at receiver. And if you need to, you trade Carlos Hyde for the guy who has Ryan Matthews. And that guy who has Ryan Matthews might be sitting there saying, I need Hyde's, so-so production now rather than waiting for Matthews, especially, and this is one trick that I learned a few years ago, start looking around and seeing which of your opponents are going to have a really bad week in terms of buys. This week is a good example. If one of your opponents, if you play in, let's say, a 14-player league, where everyone has 14 players, and 6 of the team's players are on bye, which is not that uncommon when you talk about the number of teams that are on bye this week, and Week 9 is another example, you could trade to try to shore up and make sure that they feel the competitive team and essentially steal one of their good players on bye. And that's a way to basically help them win a week, but you're getting more out of it because you're getting long-term stability. You can start to play those games against your opponents to try to shore up your team where you don't lose anything in the short term. You're getting something in the long term. Your opponents are getting something in the short term, but they're losing in the long term.
See, guys, this is why he's here. By the way, as he was talking, I put the message on our league board. Kirk Cousins, I got him. Who wants him? May the best man win. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. But
so one other trade idea. Can I throw it out?
Yeah.
I don't want to. Fantasy trades to me. I mean, someone could write a book on fantasy trading. There's a great psychology to it. In one of the trades, I'm trying to remember it exactly, but the idea is I call it the quick withdrawal. You make a trade to somebody. Let's say you offer Kirk Cousins and who's your number 2 receiver, J-Rock?
I got Bryant and Cruz. Bryant and Cruz are my 1 and 2. So
okay, so let's say Cruz. You offer Cruz and Cousins for Forte, and then some garbage player. It doesn't matter because you're going to drop them anyway. And you make that offer. And then maybe if you don't do Cruz, maybe you do your number 3 receiver. You do your number 3 receiver and Cousins for Forte, and then immediately after that, you pull back, and you see what they say. And more often than not, you'll be surprised. People, if they're interested in trading, are going to come to you, and they're going to say, "Wait a second, why?" Because they're going to be thinking, "Why did J-Rock make the offer and then pull it back? He must have learned something, or he doesn't want to do this trade anymore." This happened. A buddy of mine, he told me a year ago. He called me up. He said, "You won't believe it. I actually did this to someone. They found me the next day. He's a teacher in Denver, and one of his buddies is another teacher. And the guy tracked him down and said, 'Why'd you pull that trade out?' And, I didn't like it anymore." And they started talking, and by the end of the conversation, they agreed to the deal, and they finalized it because he piqued the other guy's interest. So it's something to think about. I know that some of your competitors are probably listening, but it's something to think about for those who aren't listening and don't realize that there's strategy involved in making the right kind of trade.
I'll tell you, man, speaking of strategy, man, I believed all along my team was built for the long haul. A part of I was having some fun about starting 0-2, and I know there's a lot of people out that can relate to that, so I wanted to have some fun with that last week, but I believed all along that a lot of what I did was built for the second half of this season. And it makes me feel good to sit here and look and see that, 6 of my starters are all in the top 10 at their position. Got a couple more on the bench there. So I'm sitting all right so far, man. And I've still got guys like the next guy I want to ask you about. And I think I'm torn between whether this is going to be a sell high kind of thing or whether he's going to pan out, because you and I were both interested in him when we talked in the preseason. Jordan Matthews finally found a place.
I knew it. I knew you were going to mention him.
Well, he found